Welcome to the Victims Advocate podcast, where we explore current events, crime, security, and insights into advocacy for victims of violent crime. My name is Brandon Stein, and I am the Victims Advocate. Helping victims of violent crime is what I do, and you can find me at www.steinlaw.com or www.victimadvocate.com. Let's hit it. Marc Hurwitz is here. Marc, what's going on, brother?
How you doing, my man?
Good. So, Marc, let me start here because I do have some things I want to discuss with you, interesting things, because you have, I'll say, maybe one of the most unique backgrounds of anyone I've ever met, just based on your life experiences and really professional experiences. But, currently, I think over the past 20 years nearly, you've been running an investigation firm, yeah?
Yeah, that's right, since 2008.
Yeah. So when I think investigations, what I think about is tailing people, the cool stuff we see on TV. But Is there anything unique to your practice or specific to your practice that you handle more frequently than, maybe others?
Yeah, you're right. There are about 7,000 private investigators licensed in the state of Florida. And most of them, 95% plus of them, are one-man shows. They are exactly what you would think. Gumshoes who are former law enforcement who love to follow people, and they're very good at it, and they're amazing at it. And we all, as a society, we need their services. What we do is very different. We're an agency. So I have case managers who interact with our clients. We do all kinds of things. Of course, we do surveillance for infidelity and insurance defense, but also things like asset searches, bank account searches, business due diligence, employment screening. We find people, international investigations, jury vetting, any hard to find information. We try not to say no if we can.
Yeah, and in your practice in particular, your qualifications, I would imagine, run at the forefront of when people make a decision to hire you. I say qualifications, I'm not talking about the fact that you're an agency. That's important.
Yeah.
But you have worked places in the past that probably 99.9% of the general public never worked.
Yeah, and I think the elephant in the room is that I was at the CIA, and it was an amazing experience. I was there for several years, and before that, I worked in the White House for 3 years in the National Security Council staff. And it does give our clients a certain degree of confidence in our ability and our integrity.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about, and I don't know if we've ever spoken about this, but at some point in time, I know you have an undergraduate degree and you have degrees, but at some point in time, you had to have made the decision. Okay, I want to go into public service. I don't know if it was always federal government, but was it something that you always aspired to do, or is it something that triggered maybe when you were at university that, hey, this would be cool to get into?
I love sharing this very brief story, especially for young adults who are thinking about what career to get into and how to do it. I grew up in Buffalo, and I interned in high school for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And that led to my interest in public service. And when I went to SUNY Buffalo for my undergrad, I spent a semester at the State Department as an intern. And through the connections that I made there, I was able to get an internship at the White House while I was at graduate school at George Washington University. And that led to a full-time job inside the West Wing. Doing intelligence work. My boss was the point man for intelligence for the president. And it's not about family connections or political contributions. It was all about internships and building my own network, and it served me well.
Yeah, I guess the moral of that story is you never know what doors are going to open until you walk through one door, and then you never know who this guy knows or this gal knows, right? It's
that's
wild.
Exactly right. Yeah,
it's wild. Now, when you're working, it's working in the National Security Department, essentially, right? So,
National Security Council. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the National Security Council. So, is there a training that you have to undergo, or is it learn? I hope it's not on the job training. I'm sure there is an extent of on the job, but there's got to be some training you had to undergo.
Well, I was the junior person on staff. So I did whatever I was told to do. It wasn't really until I got to CIA that the serious training occurred. And I did many things in CIA, and I spent probably about a total of a year and a half of full-time just training.
So if I heard you right, in the National Security Council, from there the door that opened next was you had an opportunity to enter the CIA, that agency.
That's right. Yeah.
So the training, I'd imagine it's got to be incredibly rigorous training when you step through the doors of the CIA.
Yeah. There's not much I can talk about that. There is a great book called Class 12 if people want to know what the training was like. I think that's a great resource. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd imagine, yeah, and obviously it's understandable why you can't go into it, and there's things that you obviously can't go into with anyone, but I'd imagine whatever skills you learned or skills you acquired, it has to, in some respects, transfer over to what you've been doing for the past 2 decades in investigations and private security work.
Yeah, there's absolutely, and there's so many ways that it carries over. Certainly, our training in counter surveillance informs my ability to run surveillance. Although I don't do surveillance myself anymore, but that was a major part of it, and also just analyzing large sets of information and presenting it to the client.
So, Mark, let me pause for a second. We'll have to edit out the past. Did that freeze on your end too, Will? All right. So here's what I'll do just for editing purpose. This is all going to be edited. Thankfully, it's not live. So I'm going to re-ask the question, Mark, because you got cut out. I really want to make sure the answer comes through. Okay. That's cool. Yeah. Cool. So as it relates to the CIA and the training that you received, without obviously divulging what that training consisted of, it has to have transferred over in some capacity and provide you with the necessary skills needed to do the work that you're doing now in security investigations.
Absolutely. On the field side, being trained in counter surveillance really helps manage surveillance operations now, and helping my staff direct any tricky situations. And also on the analysis side, looking at large data sets and being able to put that together and present it to the clients. The CIA's client was the president. He's really the only client.
Important client.
Yeah, but every client is important.
Well, that's true.
And when we have large reports, we have to present it in a way that's digestible. Our clients are often very busy, and they don't want to read hundreds of pages. So our business due diligence reports will have a lot of footnotes. If they want to dive deeper, they can go look deeper. Certainly, our background reports could be a few hundred pages, and we'll summarize that on top. It's all about the client experience, and I learned a lot of that from CIA. And also presenting information in a way that is that sets realistic expectations. There are very few absolutes in the world.
When you say realistic expectations, well, let's use an example. If you're hired by someone you mentioned earlier to tail in what'd you say, extramarital or something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
Right. So to tail someone. So I'm assuming there are expectations that are in the mind of a client who hires you. So how do you manage those expectations in, as you put it, like a digestible form?
Yeah. I mean, our job is to observe and report. So, it's not our job to say, well, it looks like it could be with a lover or a possible boyfriend. We saw the subject with the male. We saw them, holding hands, or they were not holding hands. It has to be factual. We don't want to, let our own biases and our own opinions permeate our results.
Yeah, because I guess to use an analogy, if you're talking about a security officer, that their job is to observe and report. It's got to be factual. They use, let's say, activity logs or something. So they have to write down factually what they're observing, and they're reporting it on a log in a digestible form for an end user. And I guess in the context of your work, the end user is the client who's reading it, and you have to have that user's, sensibilities in mind when you're putting this together.
Yeah, not only that, our reports are often used in court. So we need to protect our clients in court and not offer information that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and you mentioned about analysts, being able to analyze data, analyze information, put it into a digestible format. So obviously the CIA is expansive, and thousands of employees, I'm sure. Who knows? It's my understanding were you a terrorism analyst in that type of, because I'd imagine you're dealing with some very sensitive things, maybe not more sensitive than what you deal on a day-to-day, but I would imagine, without going into detail, certain skills or processes that you had undertaken the CIA, it's got to help you in your day-to-day with what you're doing at Crossroads.
Yeah, I mean, the life of a CIA analyst, includes looking at a lot of data from a lot of different sources and putting together a story. When we do due diligence for our clients, it could be looking at the background of a company. It could be how two people or two companies are related. It's all about pulling in as much information as we can and telling that story. So using our restricted databases. We pay $50,000 a year just for data. Knowing how to manipulate open source intelligence like Google and blogs and media and social media. Putting, maybe we have to do witness interviews, putting it all together. Yep.
Yeah. So let me ask you, in the work that you're doing now, the investigation work, is there any crossover with the authorities, meaning with like local police? Do you work in collaboration with them, or is it kind of, completely separate and they don't want to help you because you're a private entity and they don't want to divulge whatever they're doing?
It's a really good question. And the typical answer for many things is, when it comes to our world, is it depends. So if we have a case where there's a recent crime, very recent crime, the police generally do not like private investigators to get involved. They see it as interference, and it may actually backfire on the client because the police may become less interested in helping because they're offended a private investigator is involved, or they feel like, oh, well, let the private investigator do all the work. I have other things to do. There are other times, though, where we do work with law enforcement, where we have to get reports. Maybe there's sometimes sharing of information if we can, depending on what the client allows, because our client, has to approve anything like that. But we try to be helpful to law enforcement. Most of our staff is former law enforcement, and that also very much helps with those connections.
Well, I guess that lends credibility to your operation. When you have former law enforcement and you're dealing with a police officer in Opelika or Miami-Dade County, I would imagine them knowing that you have former law enforcement on your staff, it's just a sense of, I guess, a comfort level that may not be there from another, private investigator that has no law enforcement experience and is really coming in as an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we've been around for 20 years, and we're fairly well known in South Florida. And I think if law enforcement officers ask each other, they know about us, and we get referrals from police officers quite often, actually, because they cannot help people in certain situations, but they refer us. So yeah, it's definitely helpful to have that positive, beneficial relationship.
So so you have clients who are victims of crime, and is that the context in which you would become involved with law enforcement, or have to maybe work in collaboration with law enforcement or in tandem?
Yeah, when I speak, I always say South Florida, really Florida is a sunny place for shady people.
Yeah.
So the crimes, that we see down here are so varied. One common one is a stolen Rolex, or stolen watch when someone
Yeah.
a gentleman goes to a club in Miami Beach and he wakes up the next morning and in a state of confusion and his watch is gone. We get maybe one or two of those a month.
Wow.
We have to a lot of times work with private establishments to get videos of certain incidents. Sometimes these private businesses don't want to give those videos up, but at least we can present a letter of preservation of evidence that our legal clients can prepare. So at least those videos won't disappear. So that's one example. But other crimes we see, let's see here. We see people give money for a car and then the people disappear. Investments, fake investment opportunities, people who have absconded with money and they can't be found. The list goes on and on.
I mean, I'd imagine, these are all crimes and you have to report to the authorities, no doubt. But bringing on someone like you or an agency like you that's a private agency, I guess the expectation is, hey, they're going to do maybe not a better job, but more of a thorough job where, hey, we're going to turn over every rock. We're going to make sure we do what needs to be done to either get, the restitution or what have you,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Law enforcement is overwhelmed. They have so much on their plate, and we have clients all the time that are just frustrated that the police officer or detective assigned to their case is not giving it enough time and attention. And I feel bad for them, and it's not the law enforcement's fault. They just have so much on their plate. But we are a boutique agency, and we, really do treat our clients with white glove service and do everything we can to help. But again, it's part of managing expectations, letting them know what a private investigator can and cannot do up front.
Yeah, I mean, expectations are important. And, I was actually thinking of you because I'm assuming you heard about what happened in New Orleans about a few weeks ago. The truck attack, where there were a lot of casualties. And there were crazy stories coming out about how the local agencies, the local authorities were actually warned by federal agencies about the potential for vehicle ramming attacks. So, I did think of you knowing your history, obviously, and I'd imagine it's got to be difficult when you're working in a federal capacity to have to, pass the baton along to these local agencies, knowing there's a threat, but the local agencies, like you say, I guess they're overwhelmed or they don't have the capacity to really address these risks.
Well, yes, there's two angles to that. The angle from the local law enforcement is that they're receiving all kinds of warnings about all these different possible terrible things that could happen. And, they have to prioritize what can they best mitigate against. On the other side is the state or federal government that needs to pass along any possible threat to cover their own butts in case something happens. So they will err on the side of passing that along, and even if it's overwhelming for local law enforcement, because they can't be caught withholding possible threat information.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like a CYA, cover your ass approach, right? So, I guess the local authorities, local police or what have you, deputies, their position is, hey, look, we get 1 million tips a day or 1 million threats a day. We don't have the budget, we don't have the bandwidth to address everything. So maybe we didn't do what we should have done to fully bulletproof against a truck ramming attack, because we were working on gun threats, riot violence, or what have you.
Yeah, I feel bad for the local law enforcement because there's only so much that they can do with resources that they have.
Yeah, I mean, so when you see these types of attacks, the terrorists, this attack in New Orleans, do you ever think, okay, you can, I guess, empathize with maybe not the local, but even the federal agencies, knowing there's such limitations in what you can do, and there's probably so many threats and risks that come through and make your head spin. Where do you start?
It's overwhelming, and I was in the intelligence community before, during, and after 9/11.
Right.
And so I saw firsthand how that looks like when every single agency would pass along every single threat imaginable because they do not want to be caught withholding anything. And there was just so many threats out there, so many tips, so much different sources of intelligence. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, it's almost like a game of hot potato, between agencies and local authorities where, hey, look, I got this threat. Just want you to know about New Orleans, or just want you to know about Miami-Dade County. When they do that, are there recommendations to be made, or they just pass the tip and expect the local authorities to, organize and somehow execute on a threat risk analysis and look into the vulnerabilities to make sure, those aren't, exposed during an event?
Yeah, I think it depends. There's a lot of coordination. The major metropolitan areas have joint terrorism task forces, JTTFs, where local law enforcement and state and federal law enforcement and intelligence all work together. Yeah.
So no, that's crazy stuff, and it seems like there's a terror attack or a shooting or a mass incident all the time. So I always think how the federal agencies come into play with the local, and it's a tough job. That's for sure. But look, Mark, hey, we've known each other. I really love talking to you. Love talking to you in this context.
We've been friends for a long time.
Yeah, it's super interesting, man. Super interesting. And obviously we've mentioned Crossroad Investigations, but is there a best way people can find you if they got a spouse that's gone missing, or
Right. Our website is the letter X, investigations with an S at the end.com. You can contact us through there. You can email us at info@xinvestigations.com. You can call us 866-976-2371. And we have a staff of case managers, and we talk to many people every day, and we love helping people. We really do.
No, I appreciate Mark. Appreciate the talk. And Marc Hurwitz, thanks for coming on, man. Yeah.
Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Brandon Stein, and I am the Victim's Advocate. Your voice matters, and if you or someone you know needs representation, visit steinlaw.com or victimadvocate.com for more information. See you next time.